The Chronicles of Ilu, the Guardian Spy. Written by Ikena Osuji. Chapter 1. The coming of the 3 suns had since passed. The rays of only one sun scorched my skin, as if there were still 2 more of them in the sky. The sand pit made it worse, all of the rays concentrated at the top, burning my feet, despite the flimsy protection of cloth and rubber underneath me. This place was like a prison. It was a prison. A work camp for those who opposed the king's rule. I wiped the sweat from my brow after hacking at a chunk of dirt. This place was far worse than Messina. At least there, I was able to use my abilities to construct things. There I had the honorary guardian title. Here, I was like a slave. Still a guardian, but in disguise. Some of my memory had been taken from me. I can only remember that I was to act as a prisoner and wait for my mission to commence. It had been nearly a full cycle of the suns, and I was still in this wretched place, waiting. "Brother, please, do not make me whip you," Kwame whispered, pinning his chi along the ground, directing it at me, so that only I could hear. Kwame was the only guardian in the camp that seemed to be aware of my mission, the only reason why I did not try to escape from this place. "Have you any word from High Command?" I whispered back after striking more dirt with my hatchet, mimicking the same earth-masking technique. "Yes, your transport arrives tonight. The mission will commence." There was a burning sensation in my chest. My hands shook with excitement. Finally, it was time. I had not gone insane. There were parts of my memory that I could not account for. I remembered the land of the West, Messina, working as a constructor, and the malaise that came with it. But there had been more during my time there. There was a struggle, or perhaps a battle, but it was unclear, coming to me more like a feeling rather than a memory, but nothing after that. Nothing except the voice which laid the parameters for my mission. Infiltrate, deceive, collect, return. That and Kwame helping to maintain my focus, warning me if I was not working hard enough, offering reassuring words to confirm my mission objectives, and offering me extra food in private. I bellowed, having felt the intense burn of a fire whip lash across my back, falling to a knee. "Yes, fall on your stomach so that I may cut off your useless head." An approaching higher-pitched voice with a strange accent jeered. I knew who it was from the tone. "On your feet now," Juma, the guardian that whipped me, demanded. I knew him from long ago, from a time before either one of us were guardians. It still dumbfounded me how a man like Juma, so full of disdain and resentment, managed to be inducted into the guardians' ranks. I quickly rose from my knee and continued striking at the rocks. "This one again." Juma sighed in his local tongue, standing over me as I continued hacking away. I focused my chi along the ground to sense him. His chi was strong, a lot stronger than it was when we were young warriors. "Oh," Juma said delightfully, having sensed what I did. "You dare use earth sensing on me, slave?" I did not answer and continued hacking away with my hatchet. "I asked you a question," Juma said, uncoiling his whip. More burning on my back made me fall to my hands and knees, gripping the sandy ground between my fingers, clenching my jaw tight. It was not Juma that whipped me, but Kwame. 3 more sharp burns lacerated my back before I eventually fell to my stomach, my limbs trembling, unable to work past the pain. "This one is no longer of use today," Kwame said to Juma, walking over to the frustrated guardian. I may have been whipped past my ability to work, but my senses were still sharp, able to see everything without looking with my eyes. "I will put him in the pit so that he is no longer a nuisance." Juma only scowled at Kwame, but nodded in agreement. "We can't have you getting killed," Kwame whispered, placing my arm over his shoulder, lifting me from the ground. "You have my thanks." I tried to whisper back, my voice too hoarse to release my words clearly. Kwame hushed me and walked with me for a few moments before pushing me, demanding that I march, in order to maintain the facade. See these two. The vibrations of the sand enabled me to still hear Juma from far away, speaking in his native tongue again, not the tongue of the Adịmians like Kwame. Their skin is so brown, not like mine and yours. Juma said to a fellow guardian that hailed from the same region as him. Theirs is the type of brown you would see on the mwimba tree, coarse and ugly, not like ours, that is deep and smooth, like soap. Surely both of them are northerners. The guardians shared a laugh. Juma lives not in accordance with Tambura, too blinded by pride, like most from his region. I said to Kwame once we had reached the pit, still struggling to get my words out. Kwame helped me lower myself into it. Come now, brother. How can someone like Juma live in accordance with Tambura? It has not yet been a lifetime since his people, your people, were given knowledge on how to live in accordance with Tambura's law. Kwame said, would you be any different than him or any proud child of Nakaaru had you not been outcasted among your people? I would pause for a brief moment to consider his words before lowering myself deeper into the pit. I fear which is worse, this enemy I am to spy on, or soldiers like Juma, should the king meet an untimely demise. My pessimism brought a smile to Kwame's face. One enemy at a time, brother, he said, closing the lid, sealing me away from the sun. Chapter 2. I lay inside the pit, alone in complete darkness, nothing but my thoughts to keep me company. I thought of the times before I was made a guardian, of the rolling green hills of Nchizonga, my home enclave in the land of Nakaaru. I thought of Juma, and those like Juma, who despised me for having a father that was not from Nchizonga, and a mother who had lost her honor. Despite being hated unanimously by warriors and citizens alike, I was fierce in battle, and had exceptional manipulation abilities, particularly with earth and sun. I thought of my name during these times. Kondo, different from Arimonu, the name which the Adịmians had given me. I also found myself pondering the same question that had been plaguing me for my entire time in the work camp. Why hadn't Juma recognized me? I had battled him many times when we were younger, enough to know the man's chi without looking at him. Even after so many cycles, Juma was still recognizable, yet he thought of me to be some nameless foreigner. Another effect from having parts of my memory taken, perhaps? It is known that an earth or wind manipulator who was capable enough can manipulate memories and alter appearances, or even change a person's chi. Perhaps that was what was done to me. Who was this enemy I was to spy on? Why was this mission such a secret that no other guardian in this entire camp, aside from Kwame and myself, knew about it, and even I did not have a full understanding of it? The moonlight bursted through the hole, just as intense as the sun, when Kwame removed the covering. I sat up, stretching my arms and yawning, unaware that I had drifted to sleep. Kwame controlled the vibrations of the water in his canteen to gently trickle down to me, before helping me out of the hole. There was another guardian with Kwame, a commander, as indicated by the blue cape on the back of his armor. So, you're the spy, the commander said with a slight grin. His skin was smooth and youthful. He looked far too young to be a commander. But his chi was immensely radiant like the sun. Undoubtedly a sun manipulator. His innate ability likely slowed his aging, many cycles ago. You're quite young, he said, assessing me. Very well. The commander turned away from both of us, heading back toward the camp. We followed, walking through the rocky canyon, where I was made to strike rocks with my small hatchet for the past cycle. Frustration ran like a wildfire throughout my entire body when looking at this place. The small dent made by the prisoners of this camp was something a small team of capable earth manipulators could accomplish in a couple days. To make me, a guardian, carry out such work, without being allowed to use my abilities with such vague mission objectives, was both odd and inhumane. Once at the entrance, I turned, taking a final look at the work camp as we neared our transport. It was vast and silent. Everyone from the prisoners to the guardians were sleeping aside from a few on night watch that allowed us passage. I certainly would not miss this awful place. Not with us. You are still on your mission, prisoner. The commander told me as I tried to enter the transport with him and Kwame. He pointed to a separate transport, one which had a cage with shackled prisoners in the back of it, as Kwame placed cold and heavy metal shackles around my neck, wrists, and ankles. I sighed internally. When will this end? Countless hours were spent in darkness, rushing through various underground transport ways that had been constructed by the Guardians. The cage on the transport was silent. Only the jingle of the chains around our wrists and necks could be heard, accompanied by the overwhelmingly defeated and saddened vibrations and an untamable rage emitted by the other prisoners that sat in the cage with me. I was not like them. Many were dissenters of King Ndubisi, violently rejecting his rule and the gifts of Tambura for a more savage existence, governed by darkness. There was no room for them in the new age. Their only salvation was subjugation. I am touched by Tambura's light, I reminded myself, sure not to allow their lowly vibrations to affect my mind. Periodically, the sun's rays would provide my chi with energy when we came above ground. Each time our transport rushed above ground, the landscape and vegetation would change. At first, we started off in southern Nakaru, where the work camp was. The place was arid and rocky, but when we came above ground the first time, I noticed the more characteristic, lush, green rolling hills of the land I hailed from in central Nakaru. The beautiful mounds of thick green grass and dense forest were the only positive memory I have of the place, really. There was darkness for a long while once our transport went back underground. When we breached again, I witnessed the shiny silver sheen of the metallic city that was Adam. From the mountainous vantage point the transport was traveling on, the king's grand palace stood taller and wider than all the other tall buildings and constructs. A strange feeling befell me while regarding the giant pyramid at the center of the city that was King Ndubisi's royal palace. There was an emptiness. I was not able to conceptualize the lack I felt. But it was as if I had not been back to the city that made me a man for many cycles. A symptom of having my memories hidden, perhaps. I stared for a long while, embarrassed to be shackled while looking at the vast, shimmering city of silver. It was pride that should have been carrying in my vibrations, but as I looked at the chains around my wrists, it was only shame that befell me before our transport would go back into another tunnel facing east. We would remain in darkness for a long while. Only the faint jingle of our metal bondages and the hum of the earth manipulating construct which propelled the transport could be heard, as the stale underground wind rustled through my hair. Curious, I thought after the silver sheen of Adam had long since faded into memory. Why were we heading east? There was nothing but seclusion out this way. The sun was in its morning phase when we came above ground again. My vision was blurred, having been in darkness all night. My earth senses, however, relayed to me what I sought. The soil of this land was different from the other lands I had come to know. It was arid and as hard as stone, inhospitable to life. To my surprise, it was not hot. In fact, the sun here was not as intense as it was in the previous camp, which was strange, given the hardness of the soil. My jaws nearly started to chatter as the transport rushed along, toward a wide structure in the distance. I continued surveying my surroundings of where I assumed to be the east. It was unlike any land I had previously encountered. It was infertile, a stark contrast to the rich lands located in the west. Its barren, flat landscape contrasted the lush, rolling hills of my home enclave. Even as my eyes adjusted to the sun, I could not see or sense any animals, which contrasted the dangerous, untamed jungles of the north. Even in the south, where there were arid canyons and a vast desert, the land was yielding at times, unlike here, where the soil was nearly indistinguishable from solid rock. Although I sensed our destination almost immediately after commanding the Earth's secrets, it became more visible when my eyes adjusted to the light. A giant black gate, stretching across the horizon which did not reflect the sun's rays. The material could quell the fury of the sun itself. A guardian outpost. There was a large collection of guardians stationed at various points of the long gate as we approached. What looked like a small town was formed inside the walls of the outpost, after those keeping guard over the gates let our group in, revealing many guardian quarters and a lone dirt road that stretched down an escarpment. I wished to be free from the heavy chains that jingled around my body while being made to march. Regiments that were off duty or passing by would glance at our group, saying nothing, but not masking their vibrations, which exuded a sense of triumph, as if jeering an air of superiority over us. I knew this feeling. I would often look upon prisoners of King Ndubisi the same way, triumphant, sometimes even feeling a sense of pity for their savage and uncivilized ways. I was disgusted to be among such a lowly bunch. I was not one of them. I was indeed one of the guardians. Aware my mission was going to commence, I could not help but wonder what such a mission required me to undertake something so humiliating. A large collection of ships swayed at a port of the outpost past the work camp at the bottom of the escarpment as we trekked further into the camp. There was indeed a full garrison stationed here. The work camp itself was vast, with many different sections, and hundreds of prisoners being ordered to slowly construct the foundation of what appeared to be a pyramid. The construct was significantly smaller than the royal palace in Adim. The conditions here appeared to be more humane than the circumstances I was made to endure in Nakaru. Here, the prisoners were allowed to use their abilities, albeit in a limited capacity. Earth manipulators were being made to clear the arid, colorless, and stone-like soil that covered this land, straining their chi to clear the way for the irrigation systems that would run underneath the pyramid. There were other sections of the camp that set up various tasks for sun, water, and wind manipulators alike. The guardians overseeing the work kept a stern lock on the prisoners that were being made to work, ensuring that their chi was weak so their tasks would be more taxing on their bodies. A harsh lesson to learn if they were to work off the debt to King Ndubisi and truly know Tambura's benevolence. The brisk air continued to blow as I kept surveying my surroundings, still trying to decipher how this land became so arid, being located near a sea without sweltering temperatures. The east seemed to be a strange land which contradicted nature. It had been my knowledge that this land had its own nations and kingdoms, autonomous from King Ndubisi's rule. If there was a guardian outpost here, there had to be at least talks of the East joining the Adịmian Empire. As we trekked down the escarpment toward one of the sections which dug an irrigation path, I took notice of the prisoners. Many were not Adịmian from what I could surmise. As with everyone about this vast land, they had dark brown skin and coily hair as I did. But as Juma had stated, the brownness of their skin was different, deeper and darker than my own, but not so dark that they could be considered southern Adịmians. They could have been mistaken for central Adịmians, perhaps, but these people were much taller than the characteristically short central Adịmians, and also had distinct facial markings and scarifications that I did not recognize. These were the Easterners, surely. This is what had happened to those among them that opposed King Ndubisi. They were now subjects of the Adịmian Empire. An unusual vibration caught my attention once our group of prisoners were made to stop at one of these camps. The commander I had met the night before was accompanied by a higher-ranking guardian, a general, his superior. But the unusual vibration did not come from them. Inside the work camp, past where the pair of guardians conversated in secret, was a man. Young, healthy, and strong, like me, about my age as well. A tattered loincloth covered his perspiring skin, covered in dust. He stood in place, a hatchet in his hand, an inquisitive expression on his face as we stared at each other. I did not know this man, at least from the parts of my memory I could recall, but he seemed familiar. The group of prisoners the strange man stood with joined our group after the guardians had their brief secret conversation, and we were made to march through the work camp toward the ships at the port. Frustrated that I was too distracted to use my earth sense to eavesdrop on the conversation, I reluctantly pushed on, still feeling the unusual vibrations of the strange man as he walked behind me. His chi was solid and strong, like that of an earth manipulator, But it wasn't the strength of his chi which drew me to him. That was the curious thing. I was not drawn to him at all, but rather, it was as if his vibrations were pulling me toward him. I was in front of him, walking toward a large vessel docked on the coast, but I could sense his eyes on me, curiosity radiating from his chi. Chapter 3. There was a last-minute shuffling of prisoners. The bunch I was with were taken onto the large vessel, while I, along with the prisoner with the strange vibrations, were brought onto a much smaller ship. The small regiment of guardians ushered us into different sections, leading me into a room filled with something so horrific it was an affront to Tambura itself. In the cramped quarters lay dozens of children and adolescents. Imprisonment of those yet to enter adulthood was supposed to be outlawed in the Empire, yet I stood there frozen with alarm, watching them cry softly for mercy, large, heavy shackles restricting their thin, malnourished bodies. "What is the meaning of this?" I demanded. Before I could turn to meet the two guardians that brought me into the quarters, a sharp pain traveled across the back of my head. It was mostly quiet when I regained consciousness. Only the sounds of metal shackles jingled with the sway of the gentle waves beneath the ship as I opened my eyes, looking at the frayed wood of the bench above me. My chi felt weak, diminished somehow, as the weeping from some of the misfortunate young souls continued. There were so many of us confined within the cramped storage spaces on the ship. Unease set deep within my chest. I could sense many were younger than myself, traumatized and shaken from the events that led them here, scared and crying over what was to await them. I was increasingly confused. Imprisonment of those yet to enter adulthood was meant to be outlawed in Adim. Perhaps this was some sort of deceptive act from the Guardians, fooling the enemy into thinking they could be trusted as slavers, but it was all speculation. I was unsure of what type of enemy awaited us. The only thing on my mind were the parameters of the mission given to me by whomever took my memories. Infiltrate, deceive, collect, return. Who exactly was I supposed to conduct these instructions on? We had to be on the Eastern Sea, surely. What sort of slavery syndicate operated out here? This was uncharted territory for the Adịmian Empire, only recently just conquered by the Guardians by the looks of it. How could they know these slavers followed Tambura's law? If the Guardians were willing to do something this heinous, this enemy surely followed no such law. Something quite strange shocked my innate water senses, making me jolt with such intensity I nearly sat upright if there had been space to do so. I inhaled, calming my vibrations, needing extra focus to pin my weakened chi along the waves outside the ship. The vibrations from the sea were not the same vibrations coming from the strange man in the camp. In fact, I had lost track of him once we were split up. The intense sensation was coming from the sea itself. I did not connect with water very well, but I still had some comprehension of the element. The waves revealed something I had never previously sensed before. Yet it seemed oddly familiar. In the distance, a circular object floated lightly atop the water, as if it were a bubble despite its tremendous size and weight. In fact, only about a quarter of the massive structure was above the water. Most of it was submerged. The most alarming feature of this strange object was that it contained vibrations detectable by my earth senses, as if it were a living thing. Such a curious thing should have been intriguing, perhaps even exciting. This was likely the start of my mission, but for reasons unknown, I was scared, just like the children that wept on the benches around me. It was the type of fear I would often feel before battle, an instinctual fear, a result of self-preservation. This is the enemy, I thought, retracting my senses from it. I had no way of knowing for sure, but I felt it. The ship slowed as it drew closer to the strange structure. I had deliberately kept myself from sensing it, but I could hold my chi no longer. It was simply too close and too large. I let my innate abilities flow naturally, immediately sensing what felt like the chi of a caterpillar. Singular, steady, slow. I manipulated my chi to travel across the waves toward the caterpillar structure, switching to earth manipulation to hone in on the solidity of its vibrations. Its vast surface was dense, almost unyielding, as I attempted to search deeper within the structure, only sensing more of the dense material it was composed of. Curious. My senses relayed that the structure was manufactured from a substance of the earth, but what was intriguing was that this thing, whatever it was not formed of metal, as the ship I was on was. It was neither wood, stone, or mud, but rather it was an incredibly dense chitin, the same substance that comprised the exoskeleton of a crab or a spider. There were countless tiny holes spread out across its surface, a curious thing indeed. I would have mistook its exoskeleton for metal had it not been for the lifelike vibrations emitting from the structure. Was it a machine? If it was, it did not seem so. It seemed to breathe through the countless small holes of its vast exterior, not like Adịmian ships that operated on a system of levers and constructional instructions, all of which did not release vibrations so lifelike as this structure or creature did. I retracted my chi back to the waves when I was unable to sense past its dense exoskeleton. I had to get deeper somehow. The structure drew my chi toward it, taking in the water around it as it inhaled. A stroke of luck. I let it pull my chi into the small holes of its exterior, sensing what I could only describe as internal organs once the water filtered in. There seemed to be 5 stomachs, each of them like spacious rooms that could house hundreds. The stomach which my chi was in was filtering out the water. I had to find another way about the structure to learn more. I attached my chi along the inner lining of the stomach to avoid being filtered back into the sea. I focused on the layers of muscle within the stomach, drawing my chi upward towards what seemed like the other organs. What was this thing exactly? Was it a machine like our ships, or was it the animal it appeared to be? My answer came shortly after making my way about its stomachs. In a separate chamber above were 5 giant hearts beating in unison. This was indeed a living being. I would not allow myself to feel the shock of sensing such an immense creature. I had to maintain my focus, sensing it was getting easier as the ship I was on was getting closer. Was this creature native to the East? Perhaps this was what the Easterners used as ships, a more natural mode of transportation on the sea rather than the ships we used. I continued making my way upward, past other massive organs housed in the creature until something caught my attention. Located deep within were faint vibrations of what felt like ants or wasps, only they were massive, far larger than any human being. At first, I thought I had made an error, having too much of my attention within the creature, but I came to realize it was no mistake of mine. My chi was level. These giant insects were dwelling within the even more giant creature. Deeply troubled, I retracted my chi immediately, my full focus back within the tight confines of the prisoner quarters on the small guardian ship. My mind was racing. What were those insects? What was the giant creature transporting them? Were these beasts what the Easterners used for warfare? Surely it had to be. I wanted to sense more, but I was too emotional. Using a technique that required such delicacy and care would be reckless in my current state. If there were any earth manipulators in that creature, they would surely sense my intrusion. I took deep breaths, calming myself, remembering the parameters of my mission once more. Infiltrate, deceive, collect, return. Whatever the creatures were, and whoever was commanding them, I would uncover it eventually. Chapter 4. It took great effort to keep my chi within the prisoner's quarters. The creature's immense vibration made the waves of the water naturally coerce my chi to travel toward it. It was near maddening having to intentionally confine my chi within such a tight space. My earth manipulation would not allow me to do so for very long. In the main quarters above, I heard the regiment's general talking. "It shall be easy," he said. It also revealed to me that he was taking puffs of an ini leaf and was within its gentle embrace. A general under the ini leaf's embrace? This was something a guardian, especially a leader of guardians, was never to do while on duty. Moreover, his chi was turbulent and unsteady. It was slight, being overpowered by the calmness the ini leaf brought him, but it was there. He seemed unfit to be a leader, particularly a leader of guardians heading into uncertainty. Any idea what these things want with Adịmian youngsters? The second in command I had met back in Nakaru asked. His chi was more stable, his mind clear. He seemed more fit to be the leader of the regiment. The general gave his second an arrogant smile. Dear Commander, we are guardians of Adim, soldiers of the great King Ndubisi, and under the direct orders of the Sarkin of Masina. We are to trade these youngsters to whomever or whatever resides in that strange ship across the way for slaves of their own, for which we will be handsomely rewarded when we return home. That is all. Slaves, I thought as I looked around the quarters. Such things were forbidden. It was tambre, against the ways of Tambura. The king would never allow this. Perhaps the Sarkin, the ruler of Messina, misled them into doing something unjust. For what reason? Or perhaps I was the one that was entrapped. I committed no offense, at least from what I could remember. My identity and parts of my memory had been taken for the sake of the mission, or at least that is what I was told. Was I lied to? Did I commit an offense so dishonorable that I was to be a slave to some unknown enemy? Surely not. I must remember my objectives. Whatever offenses being committed here were either for a reason or would be exposed, and the wrongdoers punished. I am a guardian. I assured myself. Moments such as these made me miss Kwame's reassuring words. Soldiers of the regiment came to retrieve us shortly after and ushered us out of the room toward the deck of the guardian ship. Although the metal floor underneath me was just as cold as the wind of the eastern sea. It felt good to stretch and escape the cramped confines of the prisoners' quarters. The brightness of the sun nearly blinded me as I walked in unison with the others, our chains jingling. I saw it as soon as my eyes were able to adjust to the light. My senses had not deceived me. The creature was massive and red, only a small portion of it was above the water. It looked the way it presented to my water manipulation senses. Circular, smooth, floating as if it were a bubble. If not for my earth senses telling me the secrets of its vibrations and what it housed within, I would not be able to make sense of it. It certainly did not appear to be an insect, yet it had the chi of one. The sun could not divulge more secrets of this mysterious structure. Its radiation was like that of an inanimate object, still, fixed in place, no different than the ship I was on. If this structure were indeed alive, it was not aware of it, the same way a jellyfish floats about in the ocean, alive, driven by biological commands, but unaware of its own existence. I grabbed both my ears tight, my observations being cut short by a deafening hum coming from the structure as if it was sounding a horn. The blare was so intrusive I had to close my eyes to prevent them from tearing. The structure had hardened and became rigid when I opened my eyes. What's more, there was an opening at the top of it. My heart raced when sensing what was making its way up the chambers of the structure toward the opening. I sensed dozens of bodies that were composed of something that was not quite metal, but metal-like. It seemed to encase these multi-limbed bodies, similar to an exoskeleton on an insect, with bendable sections, where ligaments and joints were, on these giant bodies that were 10 times that of any human being. I sensed sharp talons and stingers that would rival that of any giant predatory animal of the northern jungles or southern plains. I also sensed a combination of veins and membrane that matched the sound of buzzing rushing toward the opening. Like smoke, the giant insects permeated out of the opening of the structure, blackening the sky with their dark exoskeleton and large sharp talons and limbs, despite there only being a small number of them. Something so massive, so heavy, should not have been capable of flight. It was an anomaly of nature, offensive to the natural way of Tambura. These creatures were disgusting, landing on the deck of the ship with such weight their thuds could be mistaken for a group of clangorous swordsmen. The guardians were with us on the deck, all of them readying themselves for battle, poised to attack the insects as they slowly made their way toward the regiment in a linear formation, encircling the guardians when they drew near. The creatures emitted vibrations that were recognizable as insectoid, all of them containing a singular static chi, devoid of any uncertainty or emotion, identical to a worker ant or bee. They appeared to be mantis-like, standing on 6 hind legs tipped with sharp talons, with 2 pairs of mantis-like arms on either side of their dark metallic-like exoskeletons. They were faceless, but deep within their thick carapace were sharp needle-like daggers. Teeth. These creatures were clearly bred for battle. I honed into the vibrations of the shackles. The guardian who was supposed to have a hold on these chains was not focused on them. They were fully focused on the encircling insects. I could break free easily and glide across the water and make it to shore safely. I wanted to do so, but it was not my mission. Infiltrate. The first parameter of my mission echoed in my head. This was the enemy. I had to stay. I was not to run. I had to infiltrate them somehow. A strange, yet familiar feeling nearly overtook me as my heart raced, distracting me from all that was going on. Across from me, on the other side of the boat, stood the strange young man from the Guardian work camp. Our silent exchange was but for a brief moment before we turned back toward the giant insects and watched on. The mantis creatures, which stood many feet taller than the tallest human on the ship, made way for another creature, a lizard-like man. I used my earth senses on it immediately. Its chi was vastly different from the creatures that accompanied it. Unlike the insects, its chi was not steady and singular, but contained, as if it was retracted or hiding it. This lizard man with soft, wet gray flesh and deep black eyes was being deceptive. I honed further onto its vibrations as the regiment's commander tried to converse with it. Although it was slight, there was a mixture of emotions deep within the retracted chi of the lizard man. There was mostly angst, faint feelings of sadness and anger as well. Yet it appeared calm, retrieving what looked like a miniature njikota, a long-range communications device from a second pair of hooked arms from its slimy abdomen. The device was identical to what we used, despite being far smaller and compact. As the regiment's commander looked back toward the general, I sensed a greater angst from the creature, as if it did not want the commander to touch the device. I wanted to warn the commander of my findings, but I was confused. Why was this creature not acting in accordance with its chi? Was it being forced to act against its will? A deep ringing sounded in my ears shortly after the commander touched the njikota. Chapter 5. I found myself bound, pressed against the ground on my stomach in complete darkness, encased in silk. The multiple layers of the thin thread spun around my entire body from the neck down. The static vibrations of the hard surface I found myself atop were vast, stretching beyond what I was capable of sensing. I wiggled within my encasing to shift the vibrations of the silk about until it broke, freeing me. But it did not halt the feeling of confinement I sensed. Despite there being no sky, walls, or other confines, I still felt trapped somehow, as if this place, wherever it was pressing down on me. Within moments, my jaw started to chatter as a chill ran down my spine, making me regret breaking free from the silk encasing and yearn for its warmth. I searched for the strands of silk that were broken in hopes of making an improvised blanket of sorts, but alas, I could not sense the silk, as if it had mysteriously disappeared. I then bent down and felt the ground beneath me with my hands. No silk. Curious indeed. This place was too dark to see with my eyes. I would have to rely on my earth sensing. The ground was rigid and grainy. Not like sand. It was much more solid, despite some of the grain smearing onto my fingers. My senses could not decipher what material the ground was exactly, but it seemed to be an amalgamation of mud, metal, and crystal. I stood, wiping the earth substance off against my tattered robes, and started to walk. There was no other option. I continued, walking in darkness for an endless amount of time, my jaws chattering, my body shaking. I wished to be warm, I thought. And almost as if I was heard by tambura, a humidity embraced my body. I paused for a long time, assessing my surroundings. I noticed after a while that there were periods where I did not feel cramped and confined as if this place were pressing down upon me, but rather the opposite. There were phases where I sensed an expansion. It was a strange sensation that resembled a type of breathing. My earth senses further confirmed the absence of boundaries, such as walls or gates, as I continued walking along. There did not appear to be a sky, just a perpetually dark, vast place, devoid of sun and wind. The absence of barriers made sense when there were phases of expansion. But I could not understand why I would sense retraction. There simply was an absence of space periodically, despite there being no physical barriers confining me. Time was surely passing by as I continued to walk, aimless of where I was supposed to be going. The seeds of desperation started to take root as I found myself taking shallow breaths. I slowly filled my stomach with air, calming myself, assessing this strange place. Despite there being a type of breathing here, I sensed no pulse as I did when making use of my abilities on the caterpillar ship. Was this place alive just as the ship was alive? Aside from the phases of expansion and retraction, nothing else changed. The unshifting, static vibrations of the ground remained constant as I trekked in the humidity, unsettled by my current situation. I continued walking in this dark place. The cold I initially felt, long since replaced by heat. My chattering jaws, replaced with sweat that dripped off me for what I could only assume to be a long time. I stopped again. It was impossible to know how much time had passed. But I had been here for a very long time now. Too long, surely. I sat, manipulating my sweat to drip onto the hard surface I walked on, forming frozen daggers from the droplets to penetrate it. But as I suspected, it was far too solid to crack. I then tried to manipulate the ground itself, but it refused to abide by my commands. Aside from the grainy substance at the top of the surface, I was unable to command the earth. This place was not ordinary. The suffocating binds of anxiety nearly took hold, but I shook it, releasing bursts of flame from my palms toward the ground in frustration as I yelled, eventually falling onto my back. Here I was again, imprisoned. My stomach growled, but I ignored it and stood to my feet and began walking again. A full day had surely passed. Perhaps 2 or more, I could not tell. This otherworldly place was devoid of time. The only thing that seemed to occupy my thoughts was my desire to escape and carry on with my mission. With that desire, a very strange sensation. It was as if my surroundings violently rumbled for a brief moment. The sudden shaking made me lose balance and fall onto my hands and knees. I paused. It was still dark, but the ground beneath me had changed. Where before it was a hard surface with a grainy film atop of it that refused to obey my commands, it was now stone. The solid vibrations of the material obeyed my commands when I used a separation technique on it, breaking the rock beneath my palms. What's more, there was more to be sensed beyond the darkness. In fact, the darkness itself was no longer the strange corridor I walked aimlessly about in, but a cave. A cave I was familiar with as I sensed the stone and crystal formations on the walls, while slowly rising to my feet. This cave I suddenly found myself in was indeed one I was familiar with, one which had been in many times during my time in Adim. The parts of my memory that had not been taken recalled this particular cave very well. Beyond the walls of my rocky confines, I sensed sand and water. I glided forward immediately upon hearing wind rushing against the cave's rigid walls. Surely it couldn't be. I had to be experiencing some sort of delusion. I was indeed where I thought I was. A bright light made my eyes ache as I squinted, turning the corner to see an opening of the cave. I used the solid vibrations of the stone around me to propel myself forward, faster than I was able to run, rushing toward an opening where the sun shone through. Elation nearly brought forth tears from my eyes when my feet pressed into the sands of the shore outside of the cave. I was finally free from that strange place, but that is not what spurred such emotions. I was home. This shoreline was the one that overlooked the Western Sea, the very same shoreline I would often come to meditate during my time as a guardian in training. I closed my eyes, my head tilted towards the sun, and took deep breaths, ready to welcome the rays of the sun to replenish my fatigue. but a grave feeling befell me when no such thing happened. I noticed then, upon opening my eyes, that I could sense the sky. Wind was an element I did not have comprehension of, yet the sky emitted a slow but rhythmic vibration, almost as if the wind could breathe. My jaws clenched as I came to learn that it was indeed my earth manipulation abilities relaying to me the expanding vibrations of the sky, as if it were a set of lungs, expanding while taking in air. I was still trapped. Only now, in lieu of a dark, endless corridor, my entrapment was now the Adịmian shoreline. My shallow breathing returned. Why was I brought here? How had this place, a place of such tranquility for me, materialized from nothing? I recalled the immediate events that led me here. The caterpillar ship, the insects, the lizardmen holding the njikota, waking up in the endless dark corridor. It was very cold when I initially awakened, but humidity engulfed me when I cultivated a desire to be warm. As I stared toward the western sea, I realized that this was the second time I had been eased of my suffering by simply wishing it away. When I became bewildered merely moments ago, aimlessly trekking in darkness, I was eased of that discomfort by somehow being brought to a place that brought me peace. I sharply turned toward the cave. The escarpment of thick rock blocked my view of the silver sheen Adim glowed with, but it was beyond the cave. I froze, staring at the cave's entrance. I did not want to go back into darkness for fear that it may well shift back into the timeless corridor devoid of light. I instead ignited, letting the sun's energy that was stored within my chi carry me upwards, scaling the mountainous, broad escarpment with the use of sunflight. It may have been a mirage of sorts, but Adim, my home, was as I remembered. I walked through the winding plains of wheat of the ever-stretching farmlands located on the fringes of the metal city. These abundant plains were a paradise, never adhering to the harshness of nature, always plentiful and yielding, a result of the brilliant mind that is King Ndubisi, his inventions ending hunger and scarcity. The king's massive palace was situated in the distance like a mountain, dwarfing the small village dwellings located in the plains. Despite the sky still expanding and retracting slowly as if it were breathing, it was as if it were real. There were people tending to the lands and livestock, carrying about their business, greeting me as I passed by, as if they were not mere illusions of my mind. I greeted them back, playing along with whatever trick was being played on me. A group of guardians, ones which I knew from training, pitted their right fists into the left side of their chests, greeting me as a guardian. I returned the gesture as they escorted me into the city. They said nothing as we walked past Grand Ikenga statues, giant horned statues, signifying the strength of Adim. Like all constructs about this great land, they carried a silver sheen despite their grainy texture, a sign that they were composed of Adịmian metal, the very same that comprised even the armor of the guardians that escorted me. Hovering transports flew ahead, going to and fro about the land as vendors sold their goods in the streets. Even though I was suspicious of what was occurring, I could not conceal my awe of Adim. It was my true home, and it looked unchanged from what I could recall. In fact, if I could not sense the strange breathing of the sky, I would be none the wiser that this was not real. The guardians continued leading me through the vast silver city. The giant pyramid that was King Ndubisi's royal palace, situated in the background amid the vast market and tall, sleek dwellings and sculptures. My awe made me feel as if it were my first time seeing the immense metal city again. There was such abundance here. The concept that all citizens were well educated, housed, and never knew hunger was something I struggled to grasp even now. In fact, many people ate meat on a daily basis. Adim was a land free of caste and unjust hierarchies that often dominated the weak in such societies. All citizens were truly equal regardless of tribe. All served the king and worked to spread his brilliant, scarcity-ending inventions to the more uncivilized lands. All the while, I never fully took my attention off the group of guardians who were escorting me. I knew them. We were trainees together. but their names eluded me. Not because time made me forget. I knew them well. They were comrades, but that portion of my memory had been taken from me. It was strange seeing well-known faces but being unable to associate names with those faces. Where were they taking me? And for what purpose? I became unsure of whether or not I should comply with them, but the only alternative was the endless dark corridor, which yielded no answers. I had to continue. We came upon a transport station. The guardian that led the group stood directly on the metal port, closing his eyes to summon a long rectangular platform. The guardian commanded it to lift us in the air as we hovered along. The vastness of the city seemed so real. There were areas of Adim I did not venture to during my time here. Yet I could still see those areas, hovering from above, as if the architect of this place had been to Adim themselves. We neared the king's palace, veering off toward a smaller pyramid structure within the palace's vast compound, a training ground for future guardians. I noticed upon landing a single commander addressing multiple regiments. I knew this commander, his face becoming more clear as we walked from the landing platform toward him. He was exactly as I remembered, short, stalky, bald, an unbreakable chi only a master wind manipulator was capable of. He grinned upon noticing us approaching, but went on teaching his new regiment of trainees. They were learning traveling formations, a technique where multiple manipulators combined their abilities to hasten their travel. It was how our people traveled before the advent of King Ndubisi's transports. Every guardian must learn to be capable of rapid travel without the use of machines. My commander, whose name also eluded me, was an excellent teacher from what I could recall. Arimonu, what brings you here from Nakaru? He asked, a firm smile on his face as we saluted each other. Although the memory of his name had been taken from me, I remembered him being the one which named me Arimonu, the only name I'll ever answer to. No guardian, especially one under my command, can be a reject. In the Adịmian language, it is said that insults are only from the mouth. That is the meaning behind your new name, Arimonu. Let the words of no one ever bound you into lowliness again. Let no insult be your truth again, strong warrior. The words he spoke to me all those cycles ago when I was a trainee still stuck with me. It was one of the first instances where I was viewed as a human being. Sir, the reason for me coming to you today is because I am lost, I said as the guardians that escorted me left us. Lost? He asked, a curious perk on one brow. Perhaps not lost, but trapped. I corrected myself. I am looking for a way out. My commander nodded with a slight grin and opened his palm, forming a thick mist which started to take shape by our feet. The key to understanding the entrapment paradox is to understand the power of your own mind. The mist encompassed us, revealing a narrow passageway amid thick walls of white clouds. Make the entrapped believe in the rules laid by the maze, he said as we walked down the path. A trapdoor of mist suddenly blocked our path. But there are no rules. In a place that is non-existent, the only rules are the ones you believe in. He wiped the trapdoor away with a single stroke. The entire misty structure vanished, making way for a meadow of rolling green hills, the mountainous lush of the enclave I was born in. I turned sharply toward where my commander was standing, but he was gone, vanished with the cloudy maze. Welcome home, Kondo. A dreadful voice called from behind me, using the name I was given before I became a guardian, making me freeze in place, my fists tightly clenched, imbued with flames. You must be weary from your travels, but you are home now. Rest. Another familiar voice said. I trembled, not wanting to turn to meet the men that spoke to me. Not because I feared them, but because they were supposed to be dead. You fear that we will seek retaliation for what happened? The first man that spoke said. I still stood with my back facing them, but I could sense one of them smile, his gold-infused teeth gleaming with the sun. "Do not come any closer," I warned, as they continued walking toward me. "Come now, Kondo. Is that any way to speak to your chief and your good friend, your only friend?" Shaking with anger, my entire body ignited with flame at those words, I sharply turned to meet the chief whom I fought for, and the warrior I thought to be my friend. "You are no leader of mine, murderer." I lashed out at my chief, but the short, portly man adorned with many jewels only just smugly grinned at me. "And you, traitor, betrayer," I yelled, turning my attention to the tall, broad man beside him. "We were made to fight and kill for our chief. You led me to believe we were brothers, but you are no friend of mine," I said, walking toward him. "A fool I was to trust you, but like the rest of this wretched enclave, you despised me. Your unwarranted hatred for me was so deep, you killed my beloved after I disobeyed the chief." "A warrior must obey his master," the chief said. I swelled with an anger so intense, electric charges accompanied the flames that engulfed me. "Order me to kill another soul, misfortunate enough to be a warrior under the thumb of you tyrants that ruled in Chizonga?" "I think not." I swiped at the chief's head with the sun's rage, before channeling electric charges toward Masondo, the warrior I thought to be my friend. But I hit nothing. Both men vanished before my eyes, their low chuckles ringing in my ears. The laughter agitated me, making a mockery of all the pain I felt, all the pain that had been buried deep. I wouldn't stop lashing out. The agony of discovering that it was Masondo, my most trusted friend, my only friend, that carried out the chief's order to murder my beloved drew forth an unquenchable anger. Their laughs became louder the more I lashed out until their voices became unbearable, rattling my eardrums, bringing me to my knees, forcing me to hold the sides of my head in an attempt to relieve myself of the dreadful echo. "Stop!" I cried out, losing any sense of direction. I sobbed, yearning for my beloved deeply, and she appeared in front of me, the suffocating laughter of the chief and Masondo subsiding immediately with the desire to see her again. My lamentation made way for a desperate joy, her smile just as vibrant, skin as radiant, and eyes as sweet as ever. It was her, every detail, from the small gap in her teeth to the beauty mark at the bottom left side of her full lips. I embraced her immediately, tears in my eyes. "My beloved," I said. "It has been too long, Kondo. Come home," she answered calmly. I still paused at that name. "I cannot. I am lost, trapped in this place." "You must believe, Kondo. Think of home. Come back to me." I held her embrace. Her presence felt like home. I did not wish to leave. Many cycles had passed since her death. Her murder, by the hand of the very same chief that had appeared to me a mere moments earlier, the very same chief I had slain before running away to the land of Adim. She was gone. And yet, even as the sky pressed down upon me while holding her embrace, I wanted to believe the illusion, believe in the rules of this entrapment. Whomever designed this place was a master architect. "I'm sorry," I whispered softly in her ear. The parameters of my mission outweighed my desire. I had to adhere to them as a painful sob ripped through my chest. I was within the embrace of my beloved for a long while before my tears eventually stopped from the deep breaths I took, not only calming myself, but entering the state of non-thought, just as the meditation masters in Adim taught me. I had to let go of my desire. The mission called for it. I knew not of why a rendition of my master came to me in this strange place, but his words were correct. I was not to believe in the rules of this entrapment if I wanted to escape. I accepted the death of my beloved, and accepted that I restored her honor by slaying the chief in retaliation. I let go of all emotion associated with those events, entering a deeper state of non-thought. I sensed the surroundings around me change as I breathed deeply. There were no more green hills. There was no more metal city. There was only the endless dark corridor with the hard, grainy floor that was unyielding to my abilities. Despite the illusions, I was here all along. The breathing of the sky extended and retracted with my breath. I would slow my breathing even further, abandoning my desire to be free of this place. It was not real after all, despite its grand illusions that invoked such emotion from me. The cold returned as I abandoned my desire. I let go of my need for warmth and my unwillingness to be trapped. Rather, I knew I was not trapped, not bound by anything. It was only my mind being told it was trapped, but it was not. I could indeed wake up. Chapter 6. The vibrations of the caterpillar ship made me jolt when I sensed its massive hearts beating in unison. I was back in the physical world, the real world. Silk bound my hands to my body and my ankles to each other, similar to the way I was bound when entrapped in the corridor. Not only were my hands and legs bound by this silk, but there was a similar webbed material that was hardened and green encasing me, as if I were in a cocoon. With a deep exhale, I pinned my chi along the ground, traveling outside of my cocoon with my senses, observing my surroundings with my earth manipulation abilities. The interior of the caterpillar ship was immense, dark, and damp, appearing to my senses like a rigid cave, the walls faintly vibrating with the rhythm of its 5 tremendous hearts. There were other cocoons around me, each one containing the calm vibrations of someone who was asleep. These were surely all the slaves that were sold to the enemy. I took a deep breath, calming myself to focus my mind, and ran my chi along the ground, searching for a familiar vibration, that of the strange young man I seemed to be drawn to before being entrapped. As I began searching, I was distracted by a powerful vibration at the centermost point in the room. This was not the vibration of the young man I was looking for. It was something else. Something different, something unhuman. Gleaming down on my chi, like the hot rays of the sun, was the vibration of the creature which seemed to be monitoring all of the cocoons. It latched upside down from a mound that dipped down toward the center of the room. I was certain the massive mantis creature had sensed me, but it did not move. I let the rigid, cave-like walls of the ship relay to me its appearance. Exactly like a mantis, but different from those I encountered on the Guardian's ship. This one had a head nearly identical to that of a mantis, except it was overgrown, all of its features grotesque. The hundreds of bee-like eyes on either side of its head scanned the entire room simultaneously, likely able to sense the most minute movement. Its antenna slowly fluttering, twitching at the slightest sound. Aside from its antenna, it was deathly still. Watching, assessing, exactly what it was watching, I was uncertain. But I don't think it had the ability to sense my chi. I continued sensing more cautiously, getting the walls to relay to me the creature's location. It stayed still. Eventually, I stopped being so cautious. As frighteningly grotesque as the giant mantis was, it was still just an insect, untouched by Tambura's grace, unable to yield the gifts. I frantically searched for the young man's vibrations, commanding my chi to crawl through the rows of cocoons which contained the child slaves offered by the Guardians. I searched and searched, trying to sense anything remotely familiar to what I had sensed back at the outpost on the eastern shore, or what I sensed on the Guardian's ship, to no avail. My chi had traveled throughout the room. I had made my way through the countless rows of cocoons without finding the vibrations of the young man I sought. A sharp pain stabbed the pits of my stomach. The sudden disruption of my chi made me lose focus, abruptly retracting my attention from the other cocoons, back into the cocoon I was laying in. I immediately recollected myself and refocused my chi, pressing it into the hard surface of my cocoon, using the entrapment as a screen of protection while searching for whoever disrupted me. At first there was nothing, but there was a subtle vibration that gradually radiated over the cocoons before me. The signature became less subtle, radiating with such power it nearly flashed like lightning before diminishing and becoming like a dimming light. I noticed how relieved I had become once the vibration dimmed. Curious, I thought. I did not recognize the vibration as those of the young man. In fact, I did not recognize the vibration as human at all. It was more of a force of nature. My senses relaying to me that the vibration was radiating like light or fire, uncontrolled, unconscious, not radiating like the vibrations like that of a sun manipulator, controlled, methodical, deliberate. I calmed myself, pressing my chi against the cocoon once more, searching for the giant mantis watching over us. Surely such an unusual vibration had to be coming from it. My senses told me that a singular antennae from the creature was pointed in my direction. It did not flutter as it did before, but rather hovered in place, still and stiff. I could only keep my chi in place. Could this creature sense me? The strange, unstable vibration shot from its antenna again, like an untamed fire, rapidly engulfing the rows of cocoons in front of me. Just as it was about to engulf my cocoon, another vibration engulfed it first, blanketing the cocoon from the surpassing wild vibration of the insect. The entire ordeal was over in a mere moment. "You play a reckless game," a voice echoed in my ear. The chi it came from was familiar, strong, radiant, controlled, much like my own. It was the young man I was searching for. "Who are you?" I commanded my chi to whisper back. The vibrations from the creature had retracted back into its antennae for the time being. "You do not remember," the young man whispered. It sounded more like an observation than a question. "We cannot stay here. The creature is learning. Soon it will have full command over its chi and will be able to sense us in this form. We must return to their plane of consciousness." "The strange, endless place of my memories?" I asked. "Indeed, that one. What you experienced was but a small room in an endless palace. These beings, whatever they are magnificent. They are dangerous." My chi shuddered. With such uncertainty, my vibrations rose like smoke from my cocoon. I sensed the mantis's antennae fixed directly toward my location. Its flame-like vibration started to engulf every cocoon again. "Fool," the young man calmly whispered. "You must return to their plane of consciousness. Our mission depends on it." "How?" I asked. I wanted to ask him more about the mission. He was an ally, but time was limited. "We are all connected to them now. Their plane of consciousness is within you. You will find it within. There, I will find you." His whispers frittered away, leaving my cocoon as it was being engulfed by the mantis's vibrations. I retracted my chi immediately and emptied my mind, relinquishing my fear of the giant insect and any desire to know more about the events unfolding, initiating the state of non-thought. Soon I found myself unbound, seated on a hard, grainy surface, the air cold and moist, the place completely dark. Chapter 7. Hunger started to take effect on me as I sat in silence for a long while in this lifeless place. My desire could be cultivated with thought in this state of being. A feast of the finest meat, freshest vegetables, ripest yams, and sweet wine tapped from the nguo tree manifested before me at my command. I bit into the magnificent feast, unsure if this food was even real enough to nourish me, but enjoying the taste nonetheless. A concentration of radiance above me provided some light, emitting a familiar vibration. It was soon accompanied by a bright light and a vortex of wind, blowing some of the food at my feet about but ending in an instant. The chi of the young man hovered in its wake. Although the place was devoid of light, I could sense him, undeniably. "I would offer for you to join me, but your rambunctious entrance blew away your portions," I said to him when he fully materialized over some of the food that had been scattered about. "Should you choose to believe in the limitations of your entrapment, you should also be aware how said limitations can be used against you." I sensed his gaze on my food when he said that. There was something different about him, almost as if his chi were divided somehow. It was a strange sensation indeed. "Who are you?" I demanded. I did not sense the unsteadiness of deception in his vibrations. Still, the division in his chi was strange. It was as if all of his vibrations couldn't fit into his body, following him like a shadow, rather than flowing outwardly from his body. It would be unwise to trust him so quickly. I am Sorochi, a child of a land in the north. I am Arimonu, a guardian under King Ndubisi, I said. A northerner? Sorochi smiled. From which land do you hail? He asked me in Aitri, the tongue of the northerners. I am not a northerner. Rather, the name was given to me by my battle master, a great general. Sorochi observed me with a stern brow, curiosity in his eyes. But he spoke on the matter of my past no more. We must convene with the others. Time is of the essence. Others? I asked. Indeed, I will explain, but you must do as I do. He motioned for me to join him in the air. I obliged, hovering toward him as he began making the hand sign of the badger. I nearly scoffed at the thought of having to use such a rudimentary form of manipulation. Make no mistake, Arimonu, he said, certainly sensing my hesitation. Many believe the use of hand signs to be for children. The technique was developed over the cycles passed by our ancestors to be a representation of our ability. It is meant to ground one, especially in the face of uncertainty. I followed his lead, hooking my fingers to mimic that of the fearless badger. Sorochi inhaled, charging his body with electrical currents while simultaneously calling on the wind to join in unison, both elements wrapping throughout his body, concentrating near his heart. I followed him. I did not have command of wind, so I ensured the currents pulsating throughout my body were strong until the charges were nearly unbearable. It only took a few moments to realize why the use of hand signs were needed. Such an intense concentration of energy was enough to cause my already faltering muscles to tense and cease. But the sign of the badger was my reminder to not relent, to be fearless in the wake of uncertainty. We would continue to charge ourselves in unison for what seemed like an eternity. Do not relent. Sorochi somehow managed to shout over the loud rushing currents. My skin started to deteriorate amid the uncontrolled currents of sun. This was madness. But I listened. I did not know this man. I had no reason to trust him, but I continued anyway, not sure of Sorochi. Was he even a real person? Or had the insect's strange mind prison driven me mad already? Either way, I would have an answer soon enough. Focus all of your chi inward, Sorochi said. I will explode, I yelled back. Be fearless, Arimonu. This place is not the physical realm. Reluctantly, I followed, focusing my chi inward as the last strands of skin deteriorated from my body. I lost sight of my hand signs as the bright flashes from the electrical currents obstructed my view. The pain that initially radiated throughout my body had long since receded. I was not sure if I still even had hands anymore. Surely they would have deteriorated by now. But I told my mind to maintain the sign of the badger as if they were still there. My sight would be completely engulfed by the bright flash as I continued to focus all of my chi inward until there was nothing but silence. I floated along, not in the lifeless corridor that I had been entrapped in, but somewhere else. This place was dark, but not devoid of light. In fact, there were many lights, stars among the night sky, and I floated among them. Each of these lights represent individual corridors. Sorochi's voice said aloud. I could not see him. I could not see myself. I seemed to be formless, an iteration of consciousness. How are these insects able to do this? I asked. That is what we must discover, Sorochi said. Do you feel that pull? He asked. Yes. I focused my chi on whatever I could, feeling a slight pull. That is where the others are. I am unsure if we can talk freely here. But there, we can talk. I allowed myself to drift toward the pull until I hovered outside of a bright orb. Focus on its heat. Let it consume your consciousness, Sorochi said. This place was strange. I could not see Sorochi. We were both formless, yet it sounded as if he was beside me. Despite having no feet to ground myself within the vibrations of the earth, no hands to take in and manipulate the rays of the sun, and no currents to focus on to manipulate water, I focused on the orb, using the heat it radiated to guide me toward what felt like a pulse. There would eventually be another surge of energy, similar to what I felt moments earlier when escaping my corridor. Surely if I had a physical body, it would have disintegrated. The effort was painless, and although I could sense chi pulsating from the orb, it did not burn me. The flash receded in an instant. Crisp air filled my lungs with the scent of burning wood in its wake. I had weight again, bones, muscles, a body that pressed up against the soil. For a brief moment, it felt unnatural having such weight. I was aware of all the components that comprise my physical being, and it felt cumbersome, inefficient, compared to the state of being I was in before. Calls of insects and animals alike encompassed me as I observed my surroundings. I was in a jungle. My ears did not ring. My vision was not blurred and my chi was strong, yet the sudden materialization of a physical realm stunned me. My head felt as if it were a boulder as I lifted from the ground, wiping the dirt from my cheek and rose from my stomach. There was a path ahead of me. The smell of burning wood, along with the faint vibrations of others, were at the end of that path. Those are where the others are. I jumped at the sound of Sorochi's voice, turning to meet him. My distrust for him grew instantly. I did not notice it before in the corridor, given the lack of light in that strange place. But his physical being was wrong. It was not as if he was concealing his chi. I sensed the same divide within him as I did before. But this division within his chi projected his physical being wrongly. I took notice that both his feet were facing backwards as he walked toward me, his eyes cloudy, as if he were blind, and his skin shifty and unsteady, as if it were gas. I concealed my observations and suspicions of him as he approached. He seemed to be unaware of how he projected in this state of being. A passing vibration overhead made both of us pause, looking toward the parts of the sky that were not covered by the thick of the jungle. A rushing vibration that felt similar to an untamed fire loomed above. Buzzing accompanied the shadow that briefly cast over the sun. We must move quickly, Sorochi whispered along the earth. Not only did his teeth shift between fangs and teeth more befitting of a human, but even his voice was unnatural when using the technique. It sounded as if there were many voices speaking as one when he whispered. I then noticed as we carefully walked the path avoiding the insect flying overhead, that his chi was in fact not divided, but rather uncontained. I let him lead the way, observing him in secret, being sure not to use any invasive sensing on him. His chi did in fact follow him like a shadow rather than radiating out of him as it did with any other person, but not because it was fractured or divided. It was simply too vast, too immense, to contain itself properly in his physical being. Rather, the source of his chi seemed to originate from a point slightly above his head and cramped itself into a physical body that crudely resembled what he looked like in the physical realm. The result of this crude construction manifested as feet that projected backwards, smoky skin, and shifting fangs. The seeds of suspicion had been fully sown. I doubt Sorochi was an insect, but he was not human either, not entirely. My attention had been on Sorochi. I had not noticed we were approaching the edge of the path where the camp was. I looked toward the sky. The insect that flew overhead moments earlier had not returned, but a familiar sensation vibrated from above. The sky was breathing its slow, rhythmic pattern, allowing me to understand that this jungle, as real as it appeared, it was also a corridor, a machination of someone's desire. 4 people sat around a fire dressed in robes I did not recognize, their faces fully covered, and their chi still as faint as it was when we were further away from them. I have found him, Sorochi whispered to the group as we approached the camp. I felt the entire group lock onto my chi simultaneously. You're sure? One of them asked. He has been altered for the sake of the mission, but sense him, see for yourself, A blanket of weight pressed against my body as their strong, intrusive signatures intermingled with my chi more heavily this time. I stopped walking at once and blocked them out, looking at Sorochi, my fists clenched, imbued with electrical currents, my suspicion fully evident. "Arimonu, we are not your enemy," Sorochi said, carrying a nearly amused vibration within his chi. I observed the entire group. These people, assuming they were in fact people, were strange. The group Sorochi brought me to were fully cloaked in their strange white, bandage-like robes that covered their entire body. Not even so much as a single strand of hair was left uncovered. They did not project like Sorochi did in this state of being, however. In fact, their robes seemed to be concealing their identities. They only emitted vibrations faint enough to be read as humans. I could not sense their elemental capability. Battling them would be unwise. I reluctantly stood down and let them sense me. Their intrusion threw off my equilibrium. I was forced to take a knee. However, I could also sense them more in depth, as they sensed me. It was impossible to sense which vibrations belonged to whom, as they all sensed my chi at the same time. Their vibrations emitted a strong, level steadiness, devoid of deception. It was as strong as rushing wind, solid like rock, constant like flame, and dangerously malleable like water. These people were surely guardians. "Indeed, this is the guardian spy," a woman's voice said. It was one of the cloaked guardians, but I was unsure which one. I said nothing. I did not know these people, but I sensed they were formidable. How did this woman know I was a spy for the king? She chuckled through her strange, chi-suppressing garments, as if reading my thoughts. "We are an organization which hides in the shadows, feared by the very same king you serve, but trusted by him," she said, her voice calm, her chi powerful, steady, and devoid of any deception. "How am I to trust you?" I asked. I had no interest in pursuing any further knowledge of the secret organization in which she claimed to be part of. She was either friend or foe. "The enemy we face is like no other we have ever known." An earth-shaking rumbling came from the sky, making her pause. Before she returned her attention to me, she then quickly stood from her seat and pressed a finger on my forehead. "It is only a matter of time before they gather enough knowledge of us to figure out how to control our minds," she said to me internally, without speaking aloud. "What are their intentions with us?" I thought, hoping she could hear me. "If they are entrapping us in this mental prison, it is likely that they wish to learn more about us and our ability to command the elements." Another rumbling shook the earth. "The integrity of this chamber is waning. You need to leave," Sorochi said calmly to her. "It seems as if they are catching on," she said, looking toward the sky, before pressing her finger back onto my forehead. "The memory suppression that your king placed upon you is your disguise. It helps you stay in the shadows. Get to know more about the enemy and find us again. May Tambura favor you." The rumbling became loud as the earth shook. I asked her how I was to find her through my thoughts, but she had taken her finger off my head. "We must go," she said hastily, walking back to the others that were seated. "Let no harm come to the prince," she said to Sorochi before extending her palms to both myself and him. The other soldiers in her company did the same, all of them shooting a bright yellow light from their palms. Chapter 8. My mind traversed the night sky again after the pressure of the yellow light consumed my body. There was a calmness about this non-physical state I came to rather enjoy as I floated along. "Sorochi." I tried to call out. I had no voice, but I knew if I at least feigned like I had one, he would likely sense me. I could not sense his vibrations. However, instead, as I drifted along, there was something else. There was a presence, an overwhelming sense of vibration that pressed down upon me, as if trying to engulf my mind. In a physical form, it surely would have felt like an electrical bolt or burning. I resisted the strange vibration and fled, making my consciousness rush along the night sky, but it seemed to follow me. The further I fled, the more slight its vibrations became, but I sensed it still there, drifting along, watching me, following, as I tried to scurry away. By now I had grown accustomed to the sensations and vibrations associated with the insect's mind. How the corridors manifested as stars in this form felt as if they were alive once you were inside them. My mind continued to race along the night sky. I did not slow, even as I felt this presence fade away. The insects surely must have been catching on. That presence was likely what was trying to destroy the corridor of the king's affiliates, the very same one that loomed over us with its loud buzzing. I sought the nearest star, knowing that this was the corridor of a person unknown to me, but I needed immediate shelter from the presence I felt. It would likely return if I stayed too long in this form. A surge of light pressed upon my mind as I melded with the nearest star. This was not the usual pressure that came with melding in this form. It was as if I was being pulled into it rather than melding with it. I looked to retract myself from it, but I could not. The pull was too great. I fell onto my back, having been formed into a physical body so abruptly. Looking down at my hands that were covered in a sharp, grainy sand, the earth relayed to me that I was in a cave. The walls pressed in on me, and the entire cave seemed as if it were breathing as it often did when in a corridor within the insect's mind. The rushing sound of a breeze quickly diverted my attention upwards from my hands that were sunk into the sand. I recoiled, raising an arm, ready to manipulate the sand around me into pellets as a blue cloud formed above me. Many eyes bored down on me when the cloud became translucent, revealing creatures that looked lizard-like or perhaps amphibian. I recalled immediately the lizard man that initiated the small Engikota device that brought me here, that trapped all of our minds here. Sharp pellets from the sand started to form around me as I recalled the series of events. We come to you with no malicious intention. Powerfully booming voices echoed in my head, simultaneously. It was discombobulating at first, making me lose command over some of the pellets I had in my control. But the language was Lenga. The voice, if I could indeed call it that, was not a sound one could make with vocal cords, but rather, it was as if a collection of leaves rubbed together in the wind to make a sound that manifested in Lenga, similar, yet distinct, from the multiple voices Sorochi used when using the earth whispering technique. "What are you?" I demanded, reforming the sand pellets into stone, aiming it towards the group of lizard creatures situated on the cloud above me. "We are part of the collective, but do not abide by Queen Mother's commands." Queen Mother, I thought, the one which orders the entire collective to consume your kind. The one which has set in motion the convergence. Convergence, I thought. This Queen Mother, she is your leader. This convergence, that is what you want with my kind. For what reason? I asked, surmising a brief conclusion from what these strange creatures spoke of. It made sense, considering the circumstances. She is our mother, yes, but she does not lead us. I had many questions for these creatures. They sought me out, thinking of me to be an ally, or perhaps pretending to be an ally of mine. I was not yet wise to the degree of trickery of which the insects were capable of. Why then do you continue to dwell within her collective? I asked, confident that I understood what they meant when they said collective. The entire cave shook before the question could be answered. The connection to this domain weakens. You will eventually be cut off from the general collective if you do not come with us immediately. I almost snickered at their words. The insects had not learned proper deception. I think not, I said coldly. I fulfilled a parameter of my mission. Collect. They had carelessly divulged to me their true intent, convergence, and foolishly thought I would allow them to lead my mind astray in the promise of a deeper understanding of this so-called convergence. I briefly speculated as to what this could mean as the corridor shook more violently, the same way it did when I met the king's affiliates. I would eventually uncover it, but my time here among the strange, deceptive creatures was finished. Do not leave this corridor. We are allies. Trust is essential. Their intrusive voices echoed between my ears as I made the hand sign of the badger. I would hear none of it. They were with the insects, part of their species or collective in some strange way. Either way, they were the enemy. There were more pleas from the lizard men as I initiated the self-destruction technique to leave this corridor. Your connection to the general consensus will be severed if you do this, and your mind lost to Queen Mother's agents. Their plan of deception may have been rudimentary, but their vibrations were near convincing. Had I not known that they were studying our minds, I would have believed their words. My loyalty, however, was to King Ndubisi and the Empire of Adim. Not to these self-proclaimed heretics I did not trust. Ignoring their deceptive warning, I allowed the sun's energy to consume my body. The process was familiar now and much more painless. Darkness overtook me soon thereafter. Chapter 9. I awoke in my cocoon, startled to be here once again, but sure to stay calm so as not to alert any insect that may have been keeping guard over the room. Strangely, though, I could not sense any non-human vibrations nearby. To my surprise, the hatch of my cocoon slowly began opening. I readied myself for what was to come next. Something surely was responsible for it cracking open, but I noticed the hatch had opened on its own. I sat up in my silk confinement to see hundreds of other cocoons, far more than what I could remember from the last time when awaking on the ship. Strangely, my chi felt strong, and my radiation felt as if I had just been kissed by the sun, which was odd. It had been days since my physical body had taken in any sort of nutrients, surely, but I could not see or sense anything within the cocoon that would have been able to nourish me. I remembered the feast I manifested in the corridor. Could that sustain me in the physical world? Or perhaps I was kept nourished somehow in a way unknown yet. I crawled out of the cocoon, noticing others who awakened were doing the same. All of us slowly emerging from our silken casings as if waking from a deep slumber. My feet were engulfed in a soft sand once touching the ground. This place was different from where I found myself the last time. It was incredibly vast. Rocky walls stretched higher than the eye could see. The walls themselves seemed to have circular patterns etched on them, as if it were some form of writing. An unsettling feeling befell me when I tried searching for the vibrations of the living ship and found nothing. We were no longer traveling within it. The walls in the cave above emitted a static vibration that indicated a thick type of stone. This stone felt unusually dense to my senses, as if someone had compressed multiple layers of stone together to form a singular mass of the material. The walls did not expand and compress as if they were breathing. This was not a corridor within the mind of the insects. This was indeed the physical realm. More people started waking from their cocoons, speaking in a tongue I could not understand. Some carried facial markings I did not recognize, reminding me of the Easterners I came across before getting onto the Guardian ship. I watched them pass by, confusion in their voices and vibrations while trudging through the deep sand. Observing the walls of this vast place while walking along, it was clear that this cave was not meant for human bodies, but rather that of giants. We were like rodents, or even insects in scale to the walls and even the sand which came past my knees at times. There were so many others, far more than what I had initially witnessed on the Guardian ship. Many spoke a curious tongue that I could only assume to be the tongue of the Easterners. The language sounded as if it could be a northern dialect, but the words were just beyond my ability to hear. I did not have to focus my earth senses too keenly to sense the fear that was starting to take hold over the growing masses. More began waking from the seemingly endless rows of cocoons. Some spoke Lenga, calling out for loved ones, or frantically asking the others what was going on, which was curious. They seemed unaware that they had been captured by the insects. The unsteady chi radiating from most of them was also unsettling, be it radiations, inner waves, or vibrations. Their collective nervousness permeated through the air and hung over this place like a cloud of thick smoke. The more I observed, the more peculiar I found this place to be. It was not as dark as the corridor, but it was not very bright either. It was dim, with an unknown source of light barely bright enough to see the tops of the walls of the cave where giants could dwell. I saw mostly adults while walking along. There were those that had entered their duty to family and community phases, calling out for lost children, spouses, or parents. There were those like myself that had been situated in the first phase of adulthood, observing the surroundings, seeking answers in the others that were around to make sense of what was going on. There were no children or elderly in this peculiar overgrown cave, however. Amid the chaos of having people approach me, asking me questions in a tongue I could not make sense of, I sensed a calm vibration nearby, one that was balanced and unpanicked. The vibrations of a soldier, perhaps. I made my way through the crowd, surprised to see that it was a young woman, a few cycles younger than myself. "Can you understand me?" I asked in Lenga, the central-most language spoken by all Adimians. She nodded at me while walking forward, not taking her eyes off the walls of the cave. But I did not know what to say next. I did not know what was going on. Why had we all been awoken and placed in this strange cave? Had we reached the insects' homeland so soon? What did the insects want with us if not to study our minds? Moreover, how was I to fulfill the parameters of my mission now? "We must escape," I said. "Where do we go?" She said in a flat voice devoid of fear, or in fact, any emotions. "Anything I have ever known was killed or sold by guardians." I noticed her eyes held a deep numbness that I had mistakenly thought was a gaze of observation. She had suffered much sorrow. "My only hope is for my new captors to be merciful. If not, let them swiftly kill me so that I may join my dead kin in the realm of spirits," she said, her voice carrying a distant dejection. It made me recall the parts of my memories that had not been taken. She reminded me of myself before I had become a guardian. Back to the time when I was an orphaned warrior, rejected and hated by most. The difference between me and this young woman was that the guardians had saved me and given me a new life, but the very same guardians had taken everything from her. I stood in place, watching her slowly trek forward through the deep sand. A nearly airy-like sadness vibrated from her whole body like smoke. The air behind me radiated the faint vibration of a sharp pellet traveling through the wind. I turned quickly and used a reforming technique to degrade the dagger of sand being hurled at me back into dust. Across from me stood a young man, visibly seething, his jaws clenched tight through a scowl, his lips quivering with a murderous intent that radiated from his chi. "I am not the enemy!" I shouted at him, taking notice of his facial markings. They were not of any enclave in Nakaru. He shouted back at me in what sounded like the tongue of the East, which seemed to alert some that were passing by. They all paused at his words and looked toward me, suspicion in their gazes. Some said a few words, waiting for my response, but I had none as I backed away from them slowly, sensing the growing anger spilling from their collective vibrations. Just as it seemed I may have to engage the hostile crowd forming around me, a short, stocky man cut in front of me, interjecting in the brewing conflict. He spoke calmly in the curious Eastern tongue, calming the anger that had been spilling from most of them before grabbing my arm and leading me away from them. "Who are you? You have my thanks, but unhand me," I said, snatching my arm back from him when we were further away. "They think you to be a guardian," he said, his lenga carrying a northerner's accent. I hid my worry. How had I been discovered so quickly? I did not answer right away as I pressed my feet firmly into the sand, still unable to sense any non-human vibrations. The most prominent thing my senses could pick up on was the angst-filled chi mist made by those present. "Why did you intervene?" I asked, noticing the man, who was short yet very strong in stature, emit a strong calmness, a type of control from his vibrations that was indicative of special training. "They think you are responsible for the attack on their enclave." "Enclave? What enclave?" I asked again, confused as to which land the man was referring to. The man looked at me with a curious glance. Were you not in the enclave of Oyo when the insects attacked? A dreadfully familiar buzzing hummed far in the distance before I could make sense of what the man was saying. The ominous hum created a low echo throughout the cave, which brought widespread panic as almost everyone present started scrambling to shield themselves with the sand or other elements they could make use of. The man's chi trembled with fear, as did mine. The signature of dozens of heavily armored insects became clearer as they hurled toward us from the vast distance ahead. Immediately, I commanded the rays of the sun to give my body enough energy to levitate. The man followed on the ground, gliding toward the direction of the buzzing through the sand. He was an earth manipulator. There were others that flew through the air or glided along, but most would not answer the call to battle, fortifying themselves within the sand. I doubt many of these misplaced and confused souls had ever killed before. I commanded flames to push me forward quicker toward the buzzing, taking deep breaths, readying myself for the impending chaos. The insects outnumbered us vastly from what I could sense. We would surely be slaughtered. Yet as I readied myself, rushing mid-air through the high-walled cave, something was amiss. Why would the insects take us as slaves, only to slaughter us in such a manner? Had we already fulfilled our purpose to them? I was under the assumption I had more time to fulfill the parameters of the mission. I had to dodge one of the insect's sharp talons before I could fully formulate any more thoughts. I dipped, weaved, and dodged my way through their thick swarm, as if I was a fly being swatted at. The fire and electric projectiles I used were ineffective on the creatures. Their thick, metallic-like exoskeletons absorbed my blasts with ease without so much as stunning them. I would continue engaging the faceless, mantis-like creatures for a long while. Their movement, while slow and seemingly cumbersome, was dynamic. Their numerous limbs moved across multiple planes of motion simultaneously, making me be more mindful of not sustaining damage. I was forced to be defensive for most of the battle, needing the rays of the sun for a shield of protection more so than a weapon. I would zip about the air, dodging them when I could, hitting them with electrical bolts or short bursts of flame wherever I could, until the sun's rays started to run weak within me. After a long while of chaotic survival amid the air, I rushed toward the ground, needing to conserve energy. I was unaware of the time of day, but this cave had no natural sunlight. There was no way to draw more of the sun's energy unless I could flee to where the sun's rays could touch me. Some of the relentless beasts followed me to the ground. I backed away, keeping each one in sight while considering my next course of action. Their vibrations were much easier to sense now that I had use of my earth manipulation. Again, I would be forced to dodge their talon and stinger swipes, creating barriers of stone to avoid certain death. Sensing the insects through my scurrying away, it became clear why the use of sun manipulation was ineffective on the creature's natural armor. Where once it seemed like metal, the deeper I was able to sense while maneuvering through them, it was clear their exoskeleton at a base level was comprised of earth. It was not a type of mineral that could be found anywhere on Adam, but it was similar to a silicate, only more dense, more heavy and crystallized, which gave it a similarity to Adịmian metal, but it was earth nonetheless. I launched myself at one of them, maneuvering through its flailing limbs and clung onto its tail. With a deterioration technique, I commanded the silicate within the insect's exoskeleton to separate and degrade. To my relief, the stinger portion of the creature, where the technique had been applied, disconnected from its body, a weak point. Quickly, I called upon the waning energy I had from the sun and shot a single strand of electricity from the tip of my finger toward the creature's wound, frying it from the inside until it fell dormant. My victory was short-lived. More of them swarmed, forcing me to abandon my kill and continue my defensive maneuvers, constantly forming barriers to fend off the relentless, giant things. The battle was too unplanned to be won, too chaotic to know the next course of action. The deafening buzz from their wings was enough to make me want to burst my head. My vision was limited in the absence of light. My earth senses had to guide me. There were a few humans near me fighting on from what I could sense, capable manipulators like myself, forced to scurry, dodge, and run from the insects, as if we were rodents desperately avoiding extermination. I made my way to the closest one. It was the man from earlier who took me away from the angered Easterners, the Earth Manipulator. He flipped and contorted his way around the insects, making effective use of his short, stout stature. I flew toward the insect attacking him, and used the deterioration technique on its stinger, and shot an electrical strand into the wound. Suddenly, I was picking my head up from the sand. My body ached throughout, and my vision blurred as I scrambled to make my way to my feet. The world around me shifted as if I were on a boat in turbulent waters, and my ears rang. Was I struck? A crash sounded above me. Rocks landed on my head and back shortly after, causing me to roll away from the insect that had just tried to deliver a fatal blow. My senses were keen again. Another human was nearby. Not the broad-statured Earth Manipulator, but a different one. I made my way to my feet and used deterioration on the insect that was still pursuing me, cracking its exoskeleton on its abdomen before the other person that came to my aid shot flaming daggers into its wounds and dispersed them, exploding the creature's innards. I glanced at the man that had just saved my life. He was slender and tall, with strange scarifications on his cheeks. Another explosion went off nearby. The other creature I had injured before getting stunned, now being finished off by the stout, acrobatic Earth Manipulator I had sought to save. I rushed to him with the slender man, with the strange scarifications. "Can any of you manipulate the sun?" I asked as we fled. "No, I cannot," the acrobatic man answered. The slender man had not responded. I pointed up toward the sky. "Escape," I said to him in my preferred tongue. He took to the sky without a second thought, floating gently at first, but soon accelerating quickly with flames from his fists and feet. I would follow with the stout Earth Manipulator on my back. The tall Sun Manipulator moved with such speed, it was difficult to keep pace with him. I instead let him take the lead and observed. He shot bursts of flames from his fists to launch himself forward in the air, the same technique I used, but his movement was different. His chi, while strong like that of a soldier, was calm, almost if he were allowing the wind to pass through him, giving him more speed than what his flames could. I was not certain, but from my brief observation, I surmised him to be a wind manipulator as well. This would explain his flying method. We continued to push through the air, away from our pursuers, the insects, not too far behind us in this seemingly endless cave. The insect's ship, while larger than any ship I had previously witnessed, surely was not this vast. We had to be elsewhere. My muscles screamed for oxygen as I continued making use of my sunflight to flee from the endless horde of faceless insects. Unlike the Sun Manipulator, I did not connect with the wind. He was able to allow the wind to pass through him, making him weightless. I could only project myself onto the wind with my sun manipulation. My comprehension of the sun and earth manifested in the physical, useful only when commanding it. Like so many other wind manipulators, his comprehension of the wind enabled him to talk to it, manipulating the natural law of nature. Wind manipulators made great assassins for this reason. The technique I had to employ while fleeing was extremely taxing. My entire body started to shake, feeling the full weight of the Earth Manipulator on my back. "By the Creator, do not drop me," he pleaded. Luckily, the creatures were slow and could not manipulate the elements. If we maintained this pace, we would survive for as long as my abilities would allow it. There was a breeze as we turned the next corner. The inner radiation, which enables me to make use of sun manipulation, became slightly stronger. We were close. With every push forward, my chi became stronger, until I could see a moonlit horizon at the end of a long passageway. I followed slightly behind the tall sun manipulator. The insects were far behind now that our chi had gotten stronger. I noticed the sun manipulator pause mid-air as we broke from the cover of the cave. It was nightfall, but the moon's bright blue hue made it clear that we were in a jungle. Only the vegetation was vastly different from what I had come to know. I had been about most of Adim during my time as a guardian, and was familiar with the general landscape of most regions. This was not Adim. Both of the men I fled alongside emitted the same worried curiosity in their chi while observing the foreign landscape. The trees were large, so large in fact, they looked overgrown. Each one shaped like a mushroom. Their humongous branches were laden with a thick and lush vegetation my earth sense did not recognize. The trees in the Adịmian jungles never grew nearly as high as the ones we were currently observing. We proceeded cautiously, hovering down toward the lush of the trees amid the faint buzzing emanating from the cave behind us.